He let his gaze sweep around the room, taking his time. But we are reasonable, educated men. These ruffians are neither. They don't understand that there can be two sides to a question, and that it can be debated. Then they must fight it out. So far, this reason we must avoid confrontation. He glanced at his wife, and I wondered if it was her idea. What do you mean exactly? Papa asked, standing. I mean, Herr Altgett said as he turned to face Papa, that instead of going to war with these ruffians, we avoid them. In other words, we go into hiding. And leave our wives and children vulnerable? Papa shook his head. Never. Frederick, mein lieber friend, listen to me, please. What has happened to others who have met threats with violence? Tell me you have seen it. Papa did not answer, but his jaw clenched. I will remind you then, those men have been strung up from the nearest tree, their homes burned and families forced to flee. Papa looked down at the floor. Why is it not better to be unavailable when they come to call? Why not have a plan of escape? And what of our families, Ernst? Papa asked, looking up. You aren't threatened, how can you understand? I can imagine, Frederick, but I believe there is less risk this way than if you threaten them. It is you they want, not your wife and children. Papa said nothing, but I could see that he was considering Herr Altgett's idea. Although it made sense to me, the thought of facing those men without Papa sent a shiver through my body. Herr Unermann proposed that Altgett's plan be followed. If that did not work, or if one's hiding place was discovered, then the plan was to blow the horn. He looked around. All agreed say ja, all opposed say nien. I did not hear a single nien. They all discussed the new conscription law. All the men who want to fight have joined already, says Earsteves. The rest of us, for one reason or another, feel we cannot fight. I, for one, am blessed with good health, said Herr Altgett. Others, I am sure, have different reasons. Ja, said Earsteves, I would never take up arms against my new fatherland. Our own former governor, Sam Houston, said the plotting the destruction of the government is treason. So who are these men who call us traitors? It is they who are the traitors. I looked at Edward and he nodded at me. In the midst of the silence that followed, I nodded, agreeing with our teacher. Edward smiled and nodded back. When the meeting was over, I went outside while Papa talked to some of the other men. Edward came out too. I surely hope these ruffians won't come around again. I was touched by his concern. Donkey, it's just that I don't know what Papa will do. I want him to be like William Tell, but I don't want him to die. And to tell the truth, I am afraid to face them alone if he goes into hiding. You won't be alone. Just remember to blow the horn and we'll come galloping to save you. I smiled, thinking it would be worth the scare. I'll remember. Papa strode up and mounted Bucophilius. Time to go, Sophie. We bade Edward Guten Abend good evening. My head was full of his words as we rode along Broadway to the creek crossing. There we found Herr Altgett waiting for us. Frederick, I want to make things right with you. They are right, Ernst. As right as they can be, considering we think differently. Sehr gut. Then lowering my voice. Herr Altgett said I want to offer my smokehouse as a refuge if you ever need it. The latch will always be open. Danke, Ernest. On the way home, Papa and I did not talk. My heart was breaking for him because he seemed broken. It was a strange feeling. Papa had finally agreed not to stand up for his beliefs, but instead of being relieved, I felt only confusion. This was not my Papa, I realized. Would I have run for his life or stand up for it? Shadows were creeping down the hill below our house. As we brought our horses into the barn and began to unsaddle them, Papa turned to me. Sophie, it's not that I feel any less sure that the Union must be saved. It's how should I say it? I looked down. It was too painful to watch him falter. Then he went on. It's that I cannot bear the thought of you and Mama and Willie and the baby Lena having to survive without me. He put his hand under my chin and tilted it up so that I had to look into his eyes. If it were only my life, I would never run to the bushes. He was pleading for my respect, and it brought tears to my eyes. I know, Papa. He dropped his arm to his side, yet it doesn't feel right. In this country, a man should be able to stand up for his beliefs. Maybe a man must choose where to make his stand. Where else but at his own door, he asked. And then a thought came to me. Papa, why throw your life down for those ruffians? They are not worth it. A little smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. Perhaps we men should listen to you women, he said. Then he climbed up to the loft and brought down an armful of alfalfa. While Peg and Bucophilius gathered in hay with their lips, Papa talked on. If I am forced to take his offer, it is you, Sophie, who must speak to the ruffians. I guess you already knew that, Papa. You must say I've gone to San Antonio for air Felton. If they threaten you, blow the horn and I'll return at once. I swallowed and made myself say, all right, Papa. Sunday, May 18th. Tonight I had to prove my words. Once again we were awakened by the sound of horses galloping the road to our house. This time I did not stop to look out the window. I threw on my robe and ran downstairs. Papa and Mama were at the kitchen door holding each other. Then Papa released her. Don't worry, Elizabeth. I will be back if you need me. Go, go, Papa. He handed me his pistol and I stuck it in my belt. Remember the horn, Sophie. I nodded and stared at him, my heart racing. Then, with his rifle in his hand, he opened the door and disappeared into the darkness. Max barked and barked. Would they shoot him if he kept on? I hurried to the front door and locked and opened. The night was as black as my ink pot. I stepped into the gallery and called Max. He came immediately and sat at my side, growling low in his throat. I took the horn down from the post and put my other hand on Max's head. He did not look up and licked my fingers as he usually does. His eyes were fastened on the shadowy men and horses outside our gate. I thought of Willie in his bed and Lena in her cradle. I thought of Papa's words. In times like this, we all have to do what we are afraid to do. What do you want? I called. We have something to discuss with your Papa, little missy, said the same voice as before. I gathered in my breath. Papa was not far away, only across the creek. He and Edward and others would come if I gave the alarm. He's gone to San Antonio for air Felton. Left rather sudden, didn't he? No, I said flatly. A whip pool sang from my climbing tree, such a peaceful night song. I wished to be safe in my bed listening to it instead of here on the gallery. How can men want to kill each other when birds sing like that? Do you want to hear the whippoorwill? I asked. The men laughed. Max stood up and began barking. Nyan, Max. I pushed his hindquarters down and he stopped. Do you think if my father were inside he would let me stand out here alone? Well, missy, these Yankee lovers sure have yellow bellies, so I ain't sure. He tossed a rope onto the gallery. You tie that dog and go light a lantern. We'll have a look around. I tucked the horn under my arm and picked up the rope. Guttin Hund. Good dog, Max. Don't bark now. He struggled to keep a bark in his throat as I tied him. In the kitchen, I felt around the table for the fibblish jar and knocked it onto the floor. Lena began to cry, but I could hear Mama soothing her. Picking up a stick, I opened the door of the cooking stove and got a flame. My hand shook as I lit the lantern. Sophie, I turned to see Willie standing in the doorway. Willie, you have to stay in your bed. Everything will be all right if you just stay in bed. I'll come to you in a minute. Please, Mainland. He stared at me, then turned and disappeared into his room. I tiptoed out to the gallery. Then men had dismounted and stood inside the gate. One came and took the lantern from me. His face was covered with a bandana like the others, so I could see only his dark, menacing eyes. Are the barn doors locked? He asked. Yes, I hesitated. The key is in a hole on the left. He led the men across our garden, trampling the iris. At the barn he found the key, lifted the bolt, and went inside. The horses whined, banging against their stalls. I held my breath. Please don't set it afire, I thought. After a time he came out. Dank dim Heimel. They returned to the yard and walked around the back. I knelt beside Max, stroking his fur and making him sit. He could sense my fear, I know, for he never ceased growling. They strode through the peach trees and onto the gallery. Max got up and started barking. I gripped the horn, ready to bring it up to my mouth. My heart pounded wildly as they approached us. Max lunged at them, but the rope held him back. You shut that dog up or I will, said the leader. Max, Nyan, I commanded. Fortunately, he stopped. That's better. We're going inside now, missy. Might find your papa hiding behind his wife's skirts. I stood frozen. Were they going to harm Mama or the babies? Should I blow the horn? Someone tell me what to do. But there was no one. I remembered what Herr Alget said. Avoid confrontation. Very well, if you must, I said, and stepped to the door. It's all right, Mama. They just want to have a look around. Only 2 of them went inside, but they made enough noise for all 6, knocking over chairs, breaking a dish, but not a sound from Mama and the children. I could imagine her sitting on Willie's bed with Lena, holding her hand over their mouths. The whole house seemed to be holding its breath. The 2 men clomped back out again. The one with the lantern stopped where I stood and set it down. Guess we'll have to go and beat the bushes, but sooner or later we'll find him. He strode away, his spurs clicking. Max and I watched them mount and ride off. Then, leaving him to guard, I went inside and turned the key. Mama and I did not speak to each other as we got Willie and Lena settled. I rocked Willie and sang to him. At last, when he was ready to go to bed, I tucked him in. Are they coming back, Sophie? Nien, not tonight. Tomorrow night? I don't know, Willie. I'll never let them hurt you. And I truly believed it.